I never planned on taking a wife that winter. Truth is, I wasn't planning much of anything. The mountains were colder than I'd ever seen, and I figured I'd ride down to the trading post for salt, coffee, and maybe a bottle of whiskey to keep the nights from stretching too long. My boy Micah had been quiet since his mama passed, and I didn't have the heart to ask him for words he didn't have left. We just worked, ate, and listened to the wind scrape the cabin walls. The snow had been coming down for 3 days when I reached the post. Horses stood half buried outside, their breath rolling in gray clouds. Inside the stove hissed, and men shook off their coats, talking loud to drown the storm. I wanted to get what I came for and leave, but fate's got a mean sense of humor. They were auctioning off mail-order brides again. Women brought west from places that never should have sent them here. Desperate souls meeting desperate men. I'd seen it before, never cared to stop and watch, but that day I caught sight of a figure in the back, sitting still while the others wept or begged. She wore a brown sack over her head, the cloth dark with melted snow, her hands folded neat in her lap. The trader said her name was Rose Calder. The room went quiet when he said it. Someone snorted. Another man laughed. "Too ugly to marry," one of them called. "They covered her face so she don't scare the horses." The others chuckled. "Mean as coyotes. I should have turned away. Should have kept walking, but my boot stayed planted on that cracked plank floor. She didn't flinch, didn't move a muscle when they mocked her. There was something in that stillness, like she'd already lived through worse and didn't see the point in fighting ghosts anymore. The trader barked out the price. $20, and she's yours. No one spoke. No one moved. I heard myself say, "I'll take her." The trader looked me over, surprised. "You sure, Holt? She don't come with a refund." "I ain't asking for one," I said, pulling the bills from my coat. "I just need someone who can cook and keep warm what's left of my home." The men laughed again, but I didn't care. I signed the paper, took her by the arm, and led her out into the storm. She didn't speak, just kept her head down under that sack. Snow whipped between us, stinging like needles. My horse snorted, restless, but we mounted and rode north toward the ridge where the pines grew thick. The trail was near invisible. Wind howled through the gulch, filling the air with ice and ghost voices. I didn't try talking. Every word froze before it left my mouth. I could feel her shiver behind me, light as a bird, arms wrapped around herself. The cabin sat miles up, past the river, half buried under white. When we reached it, the lanterns inside were dead, and the hearth had gone cold. Micah peeked from the doorway, his eyes wide and hollow. "This is your new home," I told her. "You can take the bed by the fire." She nodded once, but said nothing. Her movements were small, careful, like she learned to take up less space than the world allowed. Micah stared at her sack-covered face, then at me, confusion twisting across his brow. I didn't have answers. That night, while the wind tore at the shutters, I sat by the stove listening to her breathe in the corner. She'd taken off her wet boots, but kept the sack on. I don't know why it bothered me so much. Maybe because I'd buried a woman once, and now here was another. Sitting silent like death itself had followed me home. When dawn came, the fire was low. I found her in the kitchen, sleeves rolled, making biscuits from the last of our flour. The smell hit me first, warm, real, human. She turned when she heard my boots on the floor. "You don't have to do that," I said. "I need to," she answered, voice soft through the cloth. "If I don't work, I'll start remembering." I understood that too well. Micah crept closer, eyes fixed on her hands. He hadn't spoken in weeks, but he reached for one of the biscuits when she smiled beneath that sack. He froze, waiting for me to scold him. I didn't. "Go on, boy," I said. "She made 'em for us." He took a bite, and for the first time in months, I heard him hum. Just a small sound, but it cracked something open inside me. After breakfast, I went out to chop wood. Snow glared white, blind, and bright. My thoughts kept circling the same place. Why'd I do it? Why'd I bring home a woman I'd never seen? I told myself it was need. A house needs hands. A boy needs care. But deep down, I reckon it was something else. Maybe I just wanted proof there was still a reason to come back through that door each night. When I returned, she was standing by the window, humming low, her fingers on the curtain. Light hit her shoulders, and for a moment, she didn't look like a stranger. She turned when I stepped in. "Mr. Holt," she said, "I can help with the traps if you want." "You ever skinned a rabbit?" "No, sir." "Then you'll learn." Her head tilted slightly. "You bought me. Least I can do is earn it." I wanted to tell her she wasn't bought. Not really, but the words tangled up in my throat, so I just nodded and stoked the fire. That night, the storm came back hard. The roof moaned, wind rattling the boards. I woke to the sound of her crying, quiet but sharp as a blade in the dark. I didn't say a word, just listened. Somewhere between the wind and her sobs, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Not the way I used to be. By morning, the world outside had vanished in white. I looked over at her, sitting by the fire, hands folded, head bowed. She whispered something I couldn't catch. Maybe a prayer, maybe a promise. Either way, I knew that winter was going to change everything. The days that followed were buried in snow and silence. I kept the traps close to the ridge and checked them before dawn, just to keep my hands from stiffening up. Rose stayed behind, mending clothes, scrubbing what little we had, and humming them low hymns that used to float through church windows back when life still had room for gentleness. Every now and then, I'd catch her humming and stop on the porch to listen. That voice. It didn't sound like a woman who'd been broken. It sounded like someone who still remembered what mercy felt like. Micah took to her quicker than I expected. He'd sit by the hearth and watch her move like he was waiting for her to disappear. She'd offer him scraps of bread, ask if he wanted to help peel potatoes, and the boy would nod without a word. The quiet between them wasn't heavy like before. It was easy, natural. Maybe because they both understood what it meant to lose something they couldn't name. I started noticing small things, the way she folded her sleeves so the ends didn't touch the flour, how she'd pause before speaking, like every word had a weight to it. At first, I thought it was fear, but after a while, I realized it was care. She'd been taught that words could wound worse than fists, and she wasn't about to draw blood again. One afternoon, I came in early from the ridge. The wind had died, and sunlight spilled across the floor like gold dust. She was kneeling near the stove, brushing ashes into a pan. Her sack had slipped loose at the neck. I could see a lock of her hair, dark and soft as chestnut bark. For a heartbeat, I wanted to step closer, to see the face beneath, but I stopped myself. She'd take that sack off when she was ready, maybe never. Either way, it wasn't mine to ask. That night, I found her outside, looking at the sky. The moon hung low, a pale ghost behind the clouds. You should be inside, I told her. Cold'll bite your fingers clean off. She didn't turn. Sometimes I forget what the stars look like, she said. Couldn't see 'em back east. Too much smoke. Too many things I didn't want to remember. Her breath fogged in the air. I stood beside her, the snow crunching under my boots. You married before? I asked, not sure why. She hesitated. No, but I belonged to someone once, not by choice. The words hung there, soft but sharp. I didn't press her for more. We just stood there, two ghosts keeping each other company. When we went back inside, Micah was sleeping by the stove, one hand curled around his toy horse. Rose tucked a blanket over him and turned to me. He dreams, she said. He does, I answered. Sometimes they ain't kind. She looked at me then, through that thin cloth. I couldn't see her eyes, but I felt them. He's got your hands, she said. I'm strong, but lonely. I laughed under my breath. Never heard anyone put it like that. She tilted her head, curious. You laugh like a man who forgot how. I did, I said, and you reminded me. From that night on, something shifted. She moved through the cabin like she belonged there. She'd hum while stirring stew, scold me gentle when I came in, dripping snow across her clean floor. Micah started speaking again. Just small words, but they meant the world. Bread, he'd say, or mama, when he was half asleep. The first time I heard it, my heart near stopped. Rose froze too, spoon in hand. Neither of us said a word. We just listened to him breathe that word again, mama. And in the hush that followed, I swear I heard the house sigh. Days bled into weeks. The storm eased, but the cold stayed cruel. We rationed flour, melted snow for water, fixed traps when they broke. Life narrowed to what we could carry, and in that narrowness I found peace. A strange peace, built from routine and quiet company. One evening, I came home late from the ridge, boots caked with ice. I opened the door, and there she was, sitting by the fire, reading to Micah from a torn Bible she'd found in the cupboard. Her voice was low, steady. And the Lord shall be thy light in the wilderness. The boy's eyelids drooped. The flames danced against the sack's fabric, making her face glow like a secret. She closed the book when she saw me. You read scripture? I asked. Not for faith, she said. For comfort. Words don't change the world much, but they help it hurt a little less. I nodded. My wife, my first, she used to say the same. Rose set the Bible down. She's gone. Been 3 winters now, I said. Fever took her fast. Micah was just a baby. She didn't answer, just looked toward the window, where snow was falling soft and slow. You kept the cradle, she said after a while. I followed her gaze. The old cradle sat near the corner, covered in dust and memories. Couldn't bring myself to burn it, I said. Guess I was holding on to something that ain't coming back. She moved closer, kneeling beside it. Her fingers brushed the edge. Maybe it ain't about bringing it back, she whispered. Maybe it's about learning how to live with what's left. I didn't have an answer for that. My throat tightened, and I turned toward the fire. She stood, quiet as snowfall, and went back to the stove. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. I sat watching the flames die low, hearing her soft breath from across the room. I thought about that sack, how it must feel to carry the weight of other people's cruelty every hour of every day. I thought about how I'd looked away from pain most of my life, calling it survival. Maybe it was time to stop. By the next morning, I'd made up my mind. I waited till the fire was bright and the room was warm. She was kneading dough at the table, sleeves rolled up, the scent of yeast filling the air. Micah played at her feet. I took a deep breath. "Rose," I said. She paused, hands still. "Yes, you don't have to wear that sack no more." The dough sagged in her hands. For a moment she didn't move. The air between us went still. Then she straightened slow, fingers trembling just a little. "You sure about that?" she asked. "I am," I said. "Ain't no one here to judge you, not anymore." She reached up, hesitated, then pulled the cloth loose. It slipped to the floor like something old dying. And when I saw her face, my breath caught. She wasn't ugly. She wasn't even plain. She was just real. Scars on her cheek, eyes like wet earth after rain. The kind of face life carves out of mercy and pain both. I didn't say a word. Didn't need to. The look on my face must have said enough, 'cause she turned away, whispering, "Now you know." "Yeah," I said, "now I do." And just like that, the cabin felt warmer than it ever had. After that morning, the house felt different. The air moved softer somehow, like the wind itself had settled down to listen. Rose didn't wear the sack again. She tied her hair back with a thin strip of cloth, kept her eyes low at first, but little by little she began to meet my gaze. There was no shame in her, only habit, like she'd spent too long hiding and had to relearn how to stand in her own light. Micah watched her like he was seeing a story unfold. He'd touch her arm when she passed, tug at her apron, follow her out to the woodpile just to be near her. The boy had found something he didn't understand, but needed all the same. I reckon we both did. That night, after she took off the sack, I couldn't stop seeing her face in the firelight. Every time the flames jumped, I'd see her scars flash like old rivers cutting through soft hills. They didn't make her less. They made her whole. And I realized how many things I'd called ugly just 'cause I was too afraid to look close. We kept living quiet. Each day carried its own small weight, fetching water from the creek, patching the roof, mending Micah's coat. Rose worked steady, never complaining, always humming under her breath. I started talking more. Told her about the mine that took my father, about the nights when I thought the mountain itself wanted me buried. She listened without pity. When I'd fall silent, she'd pour me coffee and say, "You made it out, Evan. That's something worth remembering." There was one afternoon when I caught her out back, leaning against the fence, staring down the slope. Her hair had come loose, drifting in the wind. Snow was melting in patches, leaving brown earth showing through. She turned when she heard me. "It's changing," she said. "Well, what is?" "The world," she answered, smiling faint. "Snow's giving up." "Winter ain't done yet," I told her. "Now, maybe not," she said, "but it's losing the fight." I wanted to tell her that I knew the feeling. That evening, I came in early. Micah had fallen asleep by the hearth, his toy horse tucked under his arm. Rose was sitting near him, mending a tear in his blanket. I stood at the doorway, watching her hands move. Slow, patient, sure. It hit me then how easy it had become to think of her not as a stranger, but as the piece that had been missing all along. "Rose," I said quietly, You ever think about leaving? Heading somewhere warmer when the thaw comes?" She didn't look up. "Where would I go, Evan? There ain't a place waiting for me out there." "There's always somewhere." She shook her head. "Not for folks like me. Not after what's been said. They'd see my face and call me cursed." I stepped closer, laying a hand on the back of the chair. "You're not cursed, Rose." She smiled at that, but it was the kind of smile that don't reach the eyes. "Maybe, but I've been carrying that word long enough. It feels like truth." Later, when I went to bed, I lay awake listening to the cabin breathe. Wind slipped through the cracks, whispering against the eaves. Her cot creaked soft across the room. I stared at the ceiling and thought about how strange it felt to want something again, to want her laughter in this place, her hands in this life. It scared me, that want. I'd buried love once. I wasn't sure I could stand to dig it up again. The next morning, I found her in the yard, feeding the hens. She was talking to them like old friends, scolding one that kept stepping in the trough. When she saw me, she brushed her hair from her eyes. "You look like you didn't sleep." "I didn't," I said. "Oh, I'm too much thinking." "About what?" "About how it feels when the house don't sound empty no more." Her hands froze on the feed bucket. For a second, I thought I'd said too much. Then she looked at me, really looked, and said, "It's been a long time since I've belonged anywhere." The way she said it hit me hard, like a confession neither of us had planned. We worked side by side that day. I showed her how to set traps along the ridge, how to tell fox tracks from rabbit. She was quick to learn, sharp-eyed. When she smiled, it was small, like sunlight slipping through clouds. We didn't talk much, but the silence between us was warm. By sundown, we had 2 rabbits and a story neither of us was brave enough to tell out loud. That night, I caught myself humming, not one of her hymns, but an old tune my wife used to love. Rose looked up from the table, listening. "I didn't think you sang," she said. "I don't," I answered. "Guess it just happened." She smiled. "Guess that's how most good things do." Micah laughed from his chair, mouth full of stew. And for a second, it felt like the past had turned kind. We sat there in the orange light. 3 souls who'd been broken in different ways, holding the pieces together by the thin thread of an ordinary supper. When the wind rose later that night, I went out to check the shutters. Snow had started again, thick and heavy. The mountains groaned under the weight of it. I turned to head back in when I saw Rose standing at the doorway, blanket around her shoulders. "Storm's coming," I said. She nodded. "They always do." The way she said it made me think she wasn't talking about weather. I reached for the latch, but she caught my sleeve. Her fingers were cold. "Evan," she said, voice low. "Thank you." "For what?" "For letting me be seen." The words hung in the dark between us. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, the snow melting on my coat, her hand still holding mine. Somewhere behind us, the fire cracked, and the boy stirred in his sleep. For the first time since that storm started, I felt warm all the way through. By late February, the snow began to pull back from the riverbanks. You could hear water again, rushing under thin sheets of ice. The sky turned from iron to pale gray, and the wind started smelling of pine sap instead of frost. It wasn't spring yet, not by a long shot, but the world had begun remembering how to live. Rose said she could feel it in her bones. I believed her. She'd step out early each morning, wrap a shawl tight around her shoulders, and stand at the edge of the yard like she was watching the earth wake up. I'd find her there sometimes, humming to the dawn. I took to helping her more around the house. It wasn't that she needed me. She ran things smoother than I ever had. It was that I wanted to. There was a kind of peace in scrubbing a floor beside someone who didn't mind the silence. She'd glance over sometimes, catch me looking, and the corners of her mouth would tilt just a flicker, like she was remembering how to smile. One night, after Micah had gone to bed, she sat by the fire darning socks. I poured us each a cup of coffee, thin as water, but hot enough to count. The flames cast her face in soft gold. "I've been meaning to ask," I said. "When they brought you out west, how'd you end up in that trader's hands?" She didn't look up from her work. "There was a man back east," she said. "He promised me work, a chance to start over. Said he'd find me a husband who'd treat me kind. But kind's a word men sell easy and mean less every year." I waited. "He sold my picture around," she went on. "When no one answered, he took to calling me cursed. Folks believed it. He covered my face so he wouldn't lose money on a wasted woman." Her hands trembled on the needle. "Guess he thought a sack made me easier to forget." The words scraped my chest raw. I wanted to find that man and teach him what it felt like to live afraid. But Rose just sat there, calm as a pond in summer. "I ain't ashamed anymore," she said after a while. "I just don't know how to stop feeling small." "You're not small," I told her. "You've been carrying more than most could bear." She met my eyes then, and for the first time I saw a spark of fight behind the sorrow. "Maybe, but sometimes carrying it feels like all I know how to do." Micah coughed in his sleep, and the sound broke the stillness. She set the socks aside and went to check on him. I watched her kneel beside the boy, brushing hair from his forehead, humming under her breath. The cabin had seen grief, anger, silence, but now it held something I hadn't felt in years. Gentleness. After she returned to the fire, she asked, "Do you miss her?" "Every day," I said. "She must have been something special." "She was," I said, "but she was human, too. We fought, laughed, got tired. I missed the noise of it, the sound of living." Rose nodded slow. "Noise means you're still here." That line stuck with me. Even after she'd gone to bed, I kept hearing it echo inside my skull. The next morning, I saddled the horse and rode into town for supplies. It had been weeks since I'd seen another face besides theirs. The wind bit hard, but the road had thawed enough to ride. When I reached the post, folks looked up curious. Word travels fast in a place this small. "Evan Holt," the trader said with a smirk. "Heard you took home the sack girl." The room chuckled. I set the flour and coffee on the counter slow, steady. "She's got a name," I said. That shut him up for a second. Then the trader grinned. "Guess you don't mind what's under that sack then." I looked him in the eye. "What's under it ain't your concern," he snorted. "Didn't think you'd fall that low, Holt. Thought you still had pride." "I do," I said, "and that's why I don't waste it here." I paid and left before my temper could find a reason to stay. By the time I rode home, the sun was falling behind the ridge. Smoke curled lazy from the chimney. Rose was on the porch waiting, arms crossed against the cold. "Town give you trouble?" she asked. "Always does," I said. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." I dismounted, took off my gloves. Ain't there words that matter? She looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. You really believe that? I'm trying to. That night, we ate in silence. Micah was sleepy, half dreaming, mumbling about horses and angels. When he'd gone to bed, Rose lingered by the table. You didn't have to stand up for me, she said. I didn't stand up for you. I said I told the truth. Her eyes glimmered in the firelight. Thank you anyway. The next few days passed quiet again, but something had shifted. The air between us wasn't heavy like before. It had weight, sure, but the kind you don't mind carrying. Then near the end of March, I found her by the river, kneeling in the mud, her shawl falling back. She was gathering small blue flowers sprouting through the thaw. They're lupine, she said when she noticed me. They grow where fire once burned. I crouched beside her, watching her fingers trace the petals. You like 'em? They remind me of starting over, she said. She stood, brushed dirt from her skirt, and handed me one. Here, she said, more for the table. Maybe it'll make the place look less lonely. I took it. It already does. Back at the cabin, she set the flower in a jar near the window. The sun caught its blue, spilling color across the floor. Micah pointed and grinned. Mama, he whispered. Rose froze. Tears welled, quick and quiet. I didn't say nothing, just reached out, squeezed her hand once, and then let go. That night, when the stars came out sharp and clear, I found her standing at the door again. That boy's got a way of saying what matters, I told her. She smiled faintly. He saved me, Evan. You both did. Seems to me you did the same for us. She looked up, eyes shining with something new. Hope, maybe, or just plain peace. Then I guess we're even. The thaw didn't come easy. The snow melted in patches, leaving rivers of mud and the kind of damp that crawled into your bones. I spent my mornings checking traps and my afternoons patching leaks that winter had carved through the roof. Rose would bring me coffee out back, steam rising from the tin cup, her fingers red from washing. She never complained. Said the work kept her thoughts quiet. I knew what she meant. Micah followed me everywhere those days. He'd carry kindling, stumble through the mud trying to keep up, his laugh echoing through the trees. It was the kind of sound I thought I'd never hear again. Rose would watch from the porch, arms crossed, that half-smile on her lips. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel like a tomb. It felt like a home. We started taking meals outside when the weather allowed. The world was coming back to life. Ice breaking on the creek, sparrows returning to the pines, the smell of wet earth thick in the air. Rose liked to sit with her feet tucked under her, humming while the sun warmed her face. Sometimes she'd catch me staring and ask, "What are you thinking?" I'd shrug and say, "Nothing worth telling." Truth was, I didn't have words for it yet. It was something simple, quiet joy, fragile as that first patch of grass breaking through snow. One evening, as the light faded, I found her outside hanging laundry. The sky was red and heavy with the smell of rain. She was reaching for the line when I stepped close to help. Our hands brushed, and she froze. I could feel the heat rush between us, sudden and real. She didn't pull away right off, just stood there breathing soft. Then she whispered, "Evan, don't." I stepped back slow. Didn't mean nothing by it. She looked down at her hands. I know, it's just, I ain't used to being touched like it means something good. That hit deeper than I expected. You deserve good, Rose, I said. Don't let nobody make you forget that. She didn't answer, but her eyes glimmered wet before she turned away. The rain came hard that night, drumming the roof like an army marching. Micah curled against her side on the cot, sleeping easy for once. I sat by the fire, mending a boot I'd near worn through, listening to the storm. Every now and then I'd glance her way. She was whispering to the boy, humming that same tune she always did. I realized then that the storm outside didn't scare me no more. What scared me was how much I'd come to need her there. A few days later, I went down to the lower ridge to check my traps. It was near dusk when I found one snapped clean, blood dark on the snow. Wolf prints circled close. I reset it quick, eyes on the tree line. But before I could mount my horse, I heard a low growl. There he was, gray, big, hungry. I raised my rifle, but the ground was slick, and before I could steady, the shot went wide. He lunged, teeth flashing. I fell back, slammed hard on the rocks, pain shooting through my leg. The wolf hesitated, maybe confused by the noise, then disappeared into the brush. I lay there breathing heavy, watching the sky turn black. My ankle throbbed fierce, and the cold started sinking in. By the time I limped home, night had swallowed the ridge. The lantern on the porch was burning. Rose burst out when she heard the horse, eyes wide. Evan, what happened? Just slipped, I lied, trying to sound steady. But when I hit the step, my leg near gave out. She caught me under the arm before I fell. Get inside, she said, voice sharp with worry. She eased me into the chair by the fire, knelt to pull off my boot. The swelling had already started. You can't walk on this, she said. I'll be fine come morning. She looked up, brows knit. You're a poor liar. Micah fetched a basin of water, and Rose cleaned the cut with a rag, working quiet but firm. Her hands were gentle. Sure, the kind that made a man forget he was hurt at all. I watched her, the way her hair fell loose around her face, the small line between her brows when she concentrated. When she looked up, I smiled. Didn't know you had a doctor's hand. I had to learn, she said softly. Life don't give you much choice when no one else will help. She wrapped the leg tight, sat back on her heels. There, she said, that should hold. Thank you, I said. She stood, brushed her hands on her skirt. You should rest. I'll take care of things till you're mended. You already do. For a long moment she didn't move. The fire popped between us. Then she said, Don't say that unless you mean it. I mean it, I told her. That night, she kept the lamp low and the fire steady. I drifted in and out of sleep, half aware of her moving through the cabin, checking on Micah, stoking the flames, pouring water into the basin. Each time I opened my eyes, she was there. Somewhere between dream and wake, I whispered her name. She turned, her face soft in the glow. Go back to sleep, Evan, she said. You're safe. Safe. It had been years since I'd heard that word and believed it. The next few days, my leg healed slow. Rose wouldn't let me lift a thing heavier than a cup. She took to the traps herself, riding out with Micah bundled behind her. When she came back, cheeks red from cold, eyes bright, I swear she looked more alive than I'd ever seen. You caught anything? I asked as she unloaded the pelts. A rabbit, she said, grinning, and a story to tell about near freezing my hands off. We laughed, both of us, real and easy. That evening, she sat beside me by the fire. "You ever think about leaving these mountains?" she asked. "Sometimes," I said, "but every time I do, I remember there's nothing out there worth what I got here." She smiled slow. "You mean the boy?" "Yeah," I said, then looked at her. "And maybe a bit more than that." She turned to the flames, hiding her face. "You should rest," she murmured, but I didn't sleep that night. I just lay there, watching the firelight dance across her hair, listening to the sound of the mountain breathing outside. Somewhere deep down, I knew I'd already fallen, and there wasn't a thing in this world that could make me regret it. April came slow, like an old man waking from a deep sleep. The snow turned to water, the water to mud, and the mud to the first hints of green. The ridge started smelling like earth again. Wet pine, thawed moss, smoke from our chimney drifting lazy into the clouds. Rose said it was her favorite time of year. "You can almost hear the world breathing again," she told me one morning as we stood by the porch. She was right. Even the silence felt alive. My leg healed enough for me to walk without the crutch. I took to fixing fences and cleaning the shed while she worked the garden patch behind the cabin. She'd hum and laugh with Micah, showing him how to dig rows for beans and potatoes. Every sound from that yard wrapped around the place like sunlight through glass. Sometimes I'd stop what I was doing just to watch. She didn't notice, or maybe she did and pretended not to. One evening, after supper, Rose sat by the fire, threading buttons onto one of Micah's shirts. "You'll need more tobacco," she said. "You're down to crumbs." "I'll make a trip next week," I said. "Need nails and flour, too." She looked uneasy. "You think town's gonna talk again?" "They'll talk whether I go or not," I said. "Let 'em." But she frowned, twisting the needle between her fingers. "I just don't want trouble following you home." I leaned forward. "Rose, nothing out there can touch what we got in here." Her eyes softened, but she said no more. That night, she went to bed early, and I sat up long after the fire died, thinking about how peace never stays long in a world like ours. A week later, I saddled the horse and rode out. The sky was clear, wind sharp as a knife. When I reached the trading post, a couple of men were sitting by the rail, talking low. I could feel their eyes on me before I even tied my horse. "That's him," one said, not bothering to whisper, "the fool who married the Sack girl." Another laughed. "Heard she don't wear it no more. Poor bastard must have gone blind." I kept walking. There's a kind of quiet a man learns when he's done fighting for pride. You let their words fall behind you like gravel under boots. Inside, I bought what we needed and was fixing to leave when Dobbins, the trader who'd sold her, came up to the counter. His smile was mean, the kind that don't touch the eyes. "Evan Holt," he drawled. "How's my merchandise holding up?" "She ain't your merchandise," I said. He chuckled. "Every woman's somebody's, one way or another. Thought you'd know that by now." My hand went still on the counter. "You talk that way again, and I'll make sure you regret it." The room went quiet. Dobbins raised his palms, mocking peace. "Now don't get sore. Just curious if she's earning her keep." Before I knew it, I had him by the collar, shoved him back against the wall. "You don't say her name again," I said, voice low and steady. His face turned pale. "You hear me?" He nodded quick. I let him go. Walked out before my hands could do what my anger wanted. By the time I got home, the sun was setting behind the pines. Rose was on the porch with Micah, brushing his hair. She smiled when she saw me, but that smile faded quick when she noticed the blood on my knuckles. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing worth telling." She reached for my hand, turned it over gentle. "You fought someone." I sighed. "He deserved worse." "Evan," she whispered, eyes glistening, "I don't want you losing yourself on account of me." I caught her hand, held it tight. "Ain't losing nothing, just remembering what matters." She didn't argue, but her hand trembled in mine before she pulled away. That night, the air between us was different, quiet, but not the easy kind. I heard her turn in her sleep, restless as the wind outside. The next day, I found her down by the river, washing clothes. She didn't hear me come up. I stood there a moment, listening to the water run and the song she hummed, a low, mournful tune. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red. "I keep thinking," she said, "maybe I'm bad luck. Maybe I bring hurt wherever I go." I stepped closer. "You don't bring hurt, Rose. You remind folks what kindness looks like, and that scares 'em." She looked away. "You always know what to say." "I just speak plain," I told her. She smiled, faint and tired. "You should try speaking plain to yourself sometime." "I do," I said. "You just don't always hear it." We walked back together without another word. Micah met us halfway, holding up a rock shaped like a heart. "For you, Mama," he said. Rose knelt, taking it with both hands, like it was made of glass. She kissed his forehead, and I swear the way she said thank you could have melted what was left of winter. That night, I sat out on the porch while she put Micah to bed. The sky was clear, stars bright as gunmetal. I thought about the fight, about Dobbins, about the way Rose still carried shame that wasn't hers to bear. I wanted to fix it all, but a man can't fight every ghost. Sometimes all he can do is stay close enough so they know they ain't alone. She came out a while later, wrapped in her shawl. "You shouldn't be out here, it's cold." "I like the cold," I said. "Reminds me I'm still breathing." She sat beside me, close enough I could feel her warmth through the wool. For a long time, we didn't speak. Then she said, "You make it easy to believe in good again." "Guess we both needed a reminder," I said. She turned to me, her eyes catching the starlight. "Evan," she whispered, what if the world don't let us keep this?" "Then we fight it," I said, "together." The wind stirred, lifting her hair, and I thought maybe the mountains themselves were listening somewhere deep inside. I felt the truth settle like roots in the thawing ground. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were learning how to live again. Spring came in fits and starts. One week the hills shone green. The next they wore frost again. The mountain never gave up winter easy. Still the creek ran higher each day, carrying bits of ice down from the peaks. The air smelled different now. Wet soil, pine needles, smoke from our chimney mixing with the first wildflowers. Rose said the wind felt softer. I reckon she was right. Micah grew stronger with the season. He'd run through the yard barefoot, mud up to his knees, laughing like the world had forgiven him. Rose chased after him, her laughter spilling across the ridge. Sometimes I'd stop splitting logs just to watch. Those sounds, the boy's laughter, her voice, the steady rhythm of the axe, they built a kind of music I didn't know I'd been missing. One afternoon, I found Rose fixing the cradle. It had been sitting in the corner for years, dust gathering in its cracks. She'd sanded it smooth, rubbed oil into the wood till it shone. Didn't think I'd see that old thing again, I said. She looked up, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Micah wanted to make it nice. Said maybe his dolls needed a place to sleep. I smiled. Boy's got your heart. Her eyes softened. No, he's got yours. He just borrows mine when he needs it. That night, after Micah fell asleep, she stayed by the fire mending his clothes. I watched her from my chair, the way her fingers worked the needle steady as breathing. You ever think about having more kids? I asked, not sure where the question came from. She hesitated, thread taut in her hands. I used to, she said, before the world turned mean. World's still mean, I said, but maybe it's got corners of kindness left. She looked up then, eyes searching mine. You think we found one? I know we did. She smiled. Small but real. Then she said something that sat with me long after the lamps went out. Kindness don't always stay, Evan. You gotta tend it, same as a fire. In the days that followed, I tried doing just that. We planted together, worked the soil till our hands cracked. The mountain thawed slow, leaving behind little miracles, sprouts, bird nests, the faint hum of bees. Rose moved through it like she belonged to it. There were moments I catch her standing still, eyes closed, letting the sun touch her scars. She didn't hide 'em no more, didn't flinch when the light found her. One evening, a rider came up the trail. Dust rose behind his horse, coat worn, hat pulled low. I met him halfway, hand near my rifle. Evening, he said, him name's Silas Dobbins. My blood went cold. I know the name. I said, you best turn that horse around. He smiled thin, cruel. I came for what's mine. There's nothing here for you. He dismounted slow, eyes mean. That woman you took off my hands, she broke contract. Man's got rights. I stepped closer, feeling the weight of the gun on my hip. You sold a person like she was stock. You got no rights left to speak of. He spat in the dirt. You think you can hide her up here forever? Word's traveling, Holt. She's damaged goods, and she's dragging you down with her. Before I could answer, the door creaked open behind me. Rose stepped out, shawl tied around her shoulders. Her face was calm, voice steady. You don't need to fight for me, Evan. I'll talk to him. Rose, no. She moved past me, standing tall in the fading light. You think you own me, Silas, she said. You think because you put a price on my head that makes me yours. He smirked. Ain't that how it works? Not anymore, she said. You can tell whoever's asking. The woman you sold's dead. The one standing here don't belong to anyone. The wind cut through the silence. Silas's smirk faded. You talk bold for someone who ain't got the law on her side. I stepped forward, my voice low. The law don't reach this high, Dobbins. If you ride down that trail now, you might still make it out before dark. Stay, and you won't. He stared between us, jaw tight, then spat again. Ain't worth dying for damaged goods. He mounted his horse and turned back down the trail. This ain't over, he called. Rose watched till he vanished into the trees. Her hands were shaking. I took her by the shoulders, steadying her. He's gone, I said. Her breath came hard, ragged. He'll tell others. Let him, I said. We ain't running. She leaned into me then, forehead against my chest. I'm tired of being afraid. I wrapped my arms around her. Then stop. You're safe here, with me. The mountains held their breath. For the first time since I'd met her, she cried, without hiding. No sack, no shame, just tears falling into my shirt. I held her till her sobs quieted, till the stars came out over the ridge. Later, when the fire was low and the world had gone still, she whispered, "He was wrong, you know." About what? About me, I ain't damaged. Just cracked enough for the light to get through. Oh, I smiled in the dark. That's where all the good things come from. And right then, I knew there wasn't a force in this world that could drag her back to what she'd been. Rose Calder had walked through fire and come out shining. For a while after Dobbins left, the air around the cabin stayed tight, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. I'd find myself listening for hoofbeats every time the wind changed. But days turned into weeks, and no one came. The thaw deepened, and the world kept on breathing. Still, I carried my rifle everywhere I went. Habit, maybe, or fear dressed up as duty. Rose didn't talk much about that night. She went back to her work like nothing had happened. Cooking, tending to the garden, teaching Micah his letters. But sometimes I'd catch her staring out toward the trail, eyes far away. She wasn't scared anymore. Not exactly. Just waiting for something she hoped wouldn't come. I understood that kind of waiting. It eats at you slow. One morning, I woke to find her gone from her cot. Panic hit me quick. I threw on my coat and stepped outside. The sun was barely up, and the air smelled of wet earth. Down by the river, I saw her kneeling near the water, sleeves rolled, hair loose. She was praying, not loud, just moving her lips while the current whispered. I didn't interrupt. Some prayers ain't meant to be overheard. When she came back, I poured her coffee and said, "You all right?" She smiled, tired but calm. "Just needed to thank the Lord I woke up free." "You don't owe him thanks for that," I said. "You earned it yourself." "Maybe so," she said, but gratitude's easier than guilt. That afternoon, I took Micah up the ridge for firewood. The boy was humming one of Rose's tunes, skip-stepping between roots and rocks. "She teach you that song?" I asked. He nodded. "Mama says it keeps bad dreams away." I smiled. "Then keep humming, son. Mountain's got plenty of bad dreams still hanging around." When we got back, Rose had stew bubbling on the stove. The smell filled the room. Onions, herbs, venison. I leaned against the doorway, watching her stir. "You ever get tired of taking care of us?" I asked. She turned, brows lifting. "You mean tired of living?" I chuckled. "Guess that's what I meant." "Then no," she said, "not once." After supper, we sat on the porch. The sky was painted with streaks of gold and purple. Micah chased fireflies in the yard, jar in hand. Rose watched him, her face soft. "He laughs easy now," she said. "He's got reason to." She looked at me then, a question in her eyes. She didn't speak. I wanted to tell her I loved her. The words sat heavy on my tongue, but the right time never came. So instead I said, "Oh, world feels different when you're in it." She smiled faint. "That's a mighty thing to say, Evan Holt. Only say what's true." Later that week, I rode down to the post again. Couldn't shake the thought that Dobbins might have spread his poison. The town looked the same. Dust, horses, men with nothing better to do than watch other folks live. Inside the store, talk died when I walked in. Then one of 'em, Carver, a trapper with more liquor than sense, spoke up. "Heard that scarred woman of yours stood up to Dobbins. Brave for a pretty freak." I stared at him till the smirk fell off his face. "You got something worth saying. Say it to me, not about her." He shrugged, looking away. Just talking. Then stop. I paid, turned to leave, and nearly ran into the preacher. Old man Withers had a way of appearing where he wasn't wanted. "Heard there's a woman up on your ridge for lawyers," he said. "We ain't seen her at service." "She ain't got nothing to confess," I said. "Everyone's got sin to answer for." "Then maybe start with Dobbins," I told him. "He's got plenty." The preacher muttered something about pride and hellfire, but I didn't listen. I was already halfway out the door. On the ride home, I couldn't shake the anger. Folks down there would never see Rose for what she was. They'd rather cling to gossip than grace. But when I reached the ridge and saw smoke rising from our chimney, my anger turned to something softer. The world could keep its judgment. We had our peace. That night, Rose sat near the window, mending Micah's blanket again. "You were gone long," she said. "Town's slower every trip." "They still talking?" "Always," she sighed. "Let 'em. We can't make 'em see." "No," I said, "Mom, but we can outlast 'em." She looked up then, and there was a spark in her eyes I hadn't seen before. "Steady, sure." "Then we will." Days passed, each one smoother than the last. We planted corn, fixed fences, watched the hills turn green. Micah grew taller. Rose laughed easier. I started sleeping through the night again. The ghosts that had haunted our cabin, grief, shame, loneliness, they didn't vanish, but they settled like dust in sunlight. One evening, Rose asked me to ride with her down to the meadow. "I want to show you something," she said. We left Micah with a book and took the horses slow through the pass. The air was cool, the kind that tastes like rain. When we reached the meadow, she stopped and dismounted. "Look," she said, "the whole valley was carpeted with blue. Lupine as far as you could see, waving gentle in the wind. They grow fast once the ground warms," she said. "Guess the mountain forgave us after all." I climbed down, stood beside her. "You did this?" "I scattered the seeds last fall," she said, shy. "Didn't think they'd take." We stood there a long time, the wind moving through the flowers, smelling sweet and wild. I took her hand. She didn't pull away. "You ever think," I said, "that maybe some things are meant to bloom late?" She smiled. "Maybe we are." The ride back was quiet. Both of us lost in thought when the cabin came into view. Smoke curling from the chimney. I felt something settle deep inside me, like the world had finally stopped fighting us. That night, after Micah fell asleep, I sat by the fire while Rose brushed her hair. "I used to dream about leaving these mountains," she said. "Now I'm scared of what life would be without them." I looked at her across the glowing coals. "Maybe home ain't a place, Rose. Maybe it's who waits by the fire." She met my eyes, quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Then you're my home, Evan Holt." Those words hit deeper than any prayer. I reached across the small space between us, took her hand, and for the first time since my wife's death, I didn't feel like I was borrowing happiness. I was living it. Summer crept in quiet that year, soft and slow as breath. The air turned sweet with pine, and the days stretched long enough for the world to rest. Rose said the mountain sounded different now, less like a warning, more like a hymn. I believed her. Even the wind had changed its tune. It no longer howled through the cracks, but sighed gentle, like it knew peace had finally found its way home. Micah spent his days by the creek, fishing with a bent stick and a length of twine. His laughter carried through the trees, that bright sound that made the cabin walls feel lighter. Rose would sit nearby mending or reading, her feet in the cool water. I'd work up the slope, chopping wood, but I'd always end up watching them from a distance. There's a kind of stillness you don't take for granted once you've bled for it. One evening, we were sitting outside after supper. The air was warm, the kind that hums with crickets and fireflies. Rose leaned back in her chair, looking up at the stars. "It's strange," she said. "I used to think beauty belonged to other folks, the ones born into it, who never had to hide." "You were wrong," I said. She smiled. "I was wrong about a lot of things." Micah was already asleep inside, curled up on his cot. I reached across the small table and took her hand. "You ever wish we could start over somewhere else, where nobody knows our names?" She shook her head. "I don't need new names. I just need the truth we built here." "What truth is that?" "That broken things can still grow," she said. I didn't answer, just squeezed her hand and looked out toward the dark ridge. Fireflies floated like sparks over the grass. The night was still, except for the low crackle of the fire. Later, when we went inside, I saw her stop by the cradle again. She ran her fingers over the wood, thoughtful. "You think she'd be proud of us?" she asked. "Who?" "Your wife." I took a long breath. "Yeah," I said, "I think she'd be glad I learned how to live again." Rose smiled faint. "Then maybe she's still watching." "Maybe she is." The days rolled on. The mountain grew green. Wildflowers spread across the slope. And for the first time in years, I felt time slow down instead of chase me. I started teaching Micah to ride proper, his laughter spilling across the valley as he tried to keep balance. Rose would wave from the porch, apron fluttering in the wind. Every time I looked back, I'd catch her eyes, warm and full of something I'd been too afraid to name. One afternoon, clouds began to gather over the ridge, thick and gray, humming with thunder. I could smell rain long before it came. "We should bring the horses in," I said, and Rose nodded, moving quick to help tie the shutters. But before we could finish, lightning cracked across the sky, bright and close. The rain came sudden, hard as stones. Micah squealed from the porch, laughing as the storm soaked his hair. "Inside, boy," I called. He ran for the door, but the wind caught it, slamming it shut behind him. Rose was still outside, wrestling the shutter rope. I ran toward her, boots sinking in mud. "Leave it," I shouted, but she shook her head, pulling hard. Then a second strike hit the ridge, close enough to rattle the ground. The rope snapped, the shutter flew open, and Rose fell back into my arms. We both laughed, breathless. "You always gotta fight the storm," I said. She looked up at me, rain streaming down her face. "It's the only way I know how to live." We stood there, drenched and shivering, laughing like fools while the thunder rolled. When the rain finally eased, we went inside, dripping on the floor. Micah was curled on the rug, grinning wide. "You look funny," he said. Rose smiled and ruffled his hair. That night, the storm kept on in the distance, rumbling like a tired beast. Rose sat by the fire, her wet hair braided down her back. "You think that man'll ever come back?" she asked. "Dobbins?" She nodded. "If he's smart, he won't," I said. "Him. And if he's not," I leaned forward, "then he'll find out what kind of man I am when someone tries taking my peace." She looked at me serious. "I don't want you fighting again." "I ain't looking for a fight," I said, "but I'll finish one if it finds us." Her shoulders eased a little. "You really think peace can last up here?" Depends on how much we're willing to guard it, I said. The fire popped between us. She smiled faintly, like she wanted to believe me. Then she reached out, touched my hand. You guarded well, Evan Holt. I got help, I said, looking at her. Didn't used to. A hush fell over the cabin. Outside, the rain softened to a whisper. Rose leaned her head against the back of the chair, eyes half closed. You ever wonder, she murmured, what folks down there'd say if they saw us now? Don't matter, I said. They ain't the ones living it. She laughed quiet. No, they're not. We sat there till the fire burned low, the storm moving farther away. I thought about how far we'd come from that first night. The sack, the silence, the cold. Now the air was warm. Her hand rested easy in mine, and the cabin didn't sound empty anymore. When she finally rose to go to bed, she paused by the door. Good night, Evan, she said. Good night, Rose. And for the first time, I knew the word meant more than sleep. It meant stay, live, belong. The summer drifted by slow, the kind of season that makes a man forget how to measure time. Days bled into one another, sunlight, work, laughter, the easy rhythm of breathing in a world that no longer hurt to touch. Micah grew tall enough to reach the fence rails. Rose filled the cabin with the smell of bread and wildflowers, humming that same soft tune that had followed us through every storm. Sometimes I'd wake before dawn just to listen. Her voice barely a whisper, like a prayer that finally found its answer. We took to riding down to the meadow on Sundays. Didn't need a church. We had the sky for a roof and the wind for a choir. Rose would bring biscuits. Micah would chase grasshoppers. And I'd sit there watching them like a man watching the proof that mercy still walks this earth. The lupine had spread wide that year, blue and bright as God's own paint. Rose said it meant the ground had healed. Maybe we all had. One afternoon, as we sat by the creek, she looked over at me. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. Tomorrow, I said, or the years after. Both. I stared at the water, slow and steady under the sunlight. Used to be I didn't think past sundown. Every day was just another fight to keep breathing. Now, I looked at her. Now I want to build something that lasts. Her eyes softened. What would that be? A home that don't forget the people who built it, I said. A place where Micah can grow without ghosts waiting behind every door. She smiled, and it was the kind that settled deep. You already built it, Evan. We rode back that evening with the sun at our backs. The cabin glowed warm in the distance, smoke rising from the chimney like a promise. When we reached the yard, I lifted Micah from the saddle. He laughed, ran toward the porch, and Rose watched him with that quiet pride mothers carry. I helped her down, and for a long moment we stood there beside the horses, the whole world humming around us. I never thanked you proper, she said. For what? For seeing me before I'd learned to see myself. You did the hard part, I said. You kept standing. She smiled. Maybe, but I think you held the ground steady. That night, after Micah was asleep, she came to sit by the fire. The light danced across her face, soft and strong. I used to believe the world only wanted pieces of me, she said, bits it could use and throw away. You showed me it's all right to be whole again. I reached out, touched her hand. You were whole long before I came along. I just got lucky enough to see it. She leaned closer then, eyes shining in the glow. You ever get tired of saving folks, Evan Holt? I shook my head. I ain't what I do. I just love what's worth keeping. The room went still, the kind of still that carries truth in it, and when she kissed me, gentle, sure, it wasn't a start or an end. It was every mile we'd walked to get here, every storm we'd outlasted, every breath we learned to share. Days turned into weeks again. The mountains stayed green, the air warm. I built a small corral out back. Started talking about getting more horses come fall. Rose said she wanted to plant apple trees. Micah wanted a dog. It was the kind of future that didn't feel borrowed anymore. It felt earned. One evening, we all sat on the porch while the sun went down slow over the ridge. Rose was humming, Micah half asleep in her lap. The light turned the fields to gold, and I thought about the man I used to be, the one who rode into that storm with nothing but salt, coffee, and an ache that had no name. I didn't recognize him anymore. Maybe that was the point. Rose looked up, eyes catching mine. "You're quiet," she said, "just thinking how far we've come." She smiled. "Thinking's good, but don't forget to look." I did. The world was laid out before us. Green hills, smoke trails, and that same blue bloom spreading across the valley. The sack that once hid her face was long gone, burned in the hearth months ago. What was left was the kind of beauty that comes from surviving the dark. The kind you don't earn easy, but you keep forever, once you do. As the last light slipped behind the ridge, I took her hand. "You still think we're even?" I asked. She leaned her head on my shoulder. "No," she said soft. "I think we're home." The night settled over the mountain, quiet and kind. The fire crackled inside, the boys breathing deep and steady. Somewhere down the trail, the ghost that once haunted us turned to dust and drifted away. I closed my eyes, holding her hand, and for the first time in a long life, I didn't wish for anything more. Because this, her laughter, the boys' dreams, the sound of the wind in the pines, this was the end of the story I never knew I'd been telling.